All right, I think we're live. All right, just wanted to put this together. It's a story I've been working on for a bit. It's not quite finished, but I figured I'd at least do my best at whatever rough draft I do have to piece together all the different aspects on how this whole story comes together and really trying to put together the broader picture of what's actually going on with the disaster that was the Palisades and how it's actually connected to a whole broader issue uh, that's spanning all across not just America, but frankly, it's a bigger issue uh, across the world. And so, with that, I just wanted to sort of take a step back actually and talk about just very quickly a video came about on a channel that I actually follow quite well. And if you don't know them, I highly recommend you do check them out. They're a great educational resource. They put out a lot of free content for people that are involved in the manufacturing sector for machining, especially milling and CNC programming. I personally know, well, I should say I know Titan, who runs the channel, Titans of CNC, as well as publishes a whole free educational platform on programming machines and machine operation. And I won't play the video, but you can feel free to check it out here. It's called How to Be a Better Machinist. And I wanted to loop this into how it's related to the Palisades and how the Palisades is related to a much bigger issue at hand. So, if you bear with me here, what I'm trying to jump from is this video from Titan to the Palisades to a company called the Rev Group to a much broader issue of really corporate rule over American jurisprudence and really the destruction of the ownership of public assets and the privatization of everything. Something that people you might have also heard referred to as Anification, spelled E-N and then shitification, where basically you take something that was good at one point and then you just trash it to absolute smithereens where it's no longer recognizable. So I guess I'll start off with the video first. Again, I'm not sponsored by this channel, but they're a really great resource. And the critique I had when you watch this, it's this very strange phenomena, this very strange, bizarre culture and mentality that's centered around, and I don't think it's unique at all in American culture. I think it's quite bizarre that it's actually quite prevalent in the STEM field and STEM profession particularly. But this idea that if you just study more, bro, then you will pull yourself up by the bootstraps and just make it. As if somehow that it's you as an individual's fault for somehow not doing enough to get yourself out of a particularly difficult situation, or even just to a situation where you can be comfortable, and therefore you are at fault for the situation that you're finding yourself in. You are at fault for not having more access to opportunities for career wise. You are at fault for essentially everything that comes your way. There's no greater system at play. Systemic issues are non-existent. Infrastructure does not exist as a means to, go against you. It's really just you as an individual. And that's basically what this video here can be summarized to. And it's more than just disappointment. At this point for me, it's sheer frustration, and I'm truly dumbfounded that a big channel like this, and they're not the only ones, I've talked about it before, and this really is the crux of why I started having a social media presence in the first place. This weird obsession with individual ruggedism, right? That if you aren't able to somehow pull yourself up by the bootstrap, then it's all your fault for not coming across riches, not being able to afford a reasonably comfortable life, and so on. In this video by a huge channel, mind you, they have hundreds of thousands of subscribers, essentially put this clip together that says it's your fault for not learning more and being more proactive to do more, and that's the reason why you find yourself in the situation you are. And I wanted to point out this comment here. I don't know this commenter, but I'm actually glad that somebody had the audacity to speak out about it, and it's a legitimate point of criticism, which is the real issue for why these once legendary and once great manufacturing jobs that used to pay living wages, that came with a pension, that came with benefits, but also specifically came with huge opportunities for education and growth and advancement, not just economic upward mobility, but to actually expand your knowledge, expand your understanding of how all these different pieces of this STEM, this, ethereal STEM profession really link together. And the fact of the matter is, it really all boils down to money. That's really what it all boils down to. And this comic greatly captures that issue at hand. The problem with manufacturing, especially today, particularly today, is that businesses do not care to train, to educate, and to help advance. They simply do not care. The onus is exclusively put onto you as the individual to do better. If you don't do better as an individual, it's your fault. You will not get resources to do better. And if you do, they will be marginal, and they will not be to an amount that will actually help make substantial gains forward. And it is on your dollar. It will not be on the company's dollar. It will not be on your manager's dollar. It will be on your dollar and your time. And you also are still responsible for meeting all your other obligations, in addition to somehow exceeding a billion times above and beyond, just to show that you're somehow worthy of, right? Worthy of advancing to the next step, which is just ridiculous. In manufacturing, particularly, companies do not care. This is not to say that they have cared before. There's obviously issues even back in the heyday of unions. That was always a big thing with the bottom line in manufacturing. But the fact of the matter is, nowadays, companies do not care. And even worse, more and more assets continue to be privatized. Everything from the software, so that's the licensing of using the software, to the actual development of the software. And if you want to make changes once you have it, that process is also proprietary and private. It's no longer owned or capable of being owned, right? There's no pathway of any sort, no option to exercise ownership and control or influence in any way, shape, or form of the asset, in this case, a technology asset. And in the case of this YouTube short, it's the ability to not only program your own program in the way that you want to program it into a CNC machine, but then to be able to interchange that program with other CNC machines and be able to change and make changes to it as you go along and adapt it as need be. Companies are not paying for that training. Companies do not care. And the issue is that in order to actually achieve lower costs of operation, in order to actually achieve a better trained workforce, in order to have more diversity in your supply chain for access to more vendors that diversify the different kinds of technologies and the ways that they manufacture it, giving you resiliency for access to parts and so forth, you actually have to have a more open ecosystem where the things that you produce, from suspension parts to CNC machines to the software that drives the CNC machines, have to actually be more open and able to integrate with each other seamlessly without any barriers to actually do the integration. Meaning the underlying assets have to essentially be more public. And that public invitation to have more control of and be able to do more development of fundamentally creates jobs. It creates a need for developers. It helps the bottom line by being able to automate more mundane things, and it helps you standardize those mundane things. And ultimately, what that does is a better ecosystem with more diversity of vendors that can give you more access to parts, as well as more access to professionals and experts at a moment's notice should something, fail, which inevitably is the name of the game. So that's where the start, right? That's the start of this whole charade, and we're a third of the way there, right? That's the whole start, and we're laying the foundation for why, right? In addition to the budget cuts that Mayor Karen Bass made, but to understand that why the Palisades disaster really was a disaster outside of just mismanagement on a bureaucratic level. To understand that more and more assets, particularly technology lately, and this culture of if you as an individual do not pull yourself up by the bootstraps and fix all your own problems and become rich seemingly, at the drop of a hat, then it's you not doing enough, right? That's where we're starting at. Fast forward from here to a group called the Rev Group, okay? And before I jump completely headfirst into the Rev Group, I want to add one more piece to this story. And that piece to this story is the fact that it's become a lot easier now for an individual to actually replicate a lot of the proprietary stuff that big businesses are manufacturing, whether it be suspension parts and whether it be software. What does that actually mean in terms of business? Well, in the business sense, that means you have more access to the markets by individuals and lower barriers to entry. Overall, that's a very good thing. You want that, right? You want that because it encourages competition. The more competition you have, the healthier levels of prices you have for parts and services, the better access to those services you have, meaning there's more than one service provider, and that ultimately builds a stronger supply chain. And I want to actually show you an example of what I mean when I refer to that. And I want to actually, that program you're seeing there is a CAD layout of a design for a part that these guys are milling out, or CNCing out. And I want to actually show you a part that I actually was able to make using CAD, a free CAD tool from Autodesk. It's not the only one, but essentially with all the tools and access to technology at a public level that people have now as individuals, you actually have the ability to make much of the same parts on your own without the need for just proprietary tools to do so. This is just a simple support bracket for a suspension part, and I was able to make this within mere minutes, where I basically had a simple conversation with ChatGPT, and I told it exactly what I wanted, the dimensions, and I wanted to have a wedge shape that's an L bracket with a simple rectangular foundation plate. And it understood exactly what I wanted. And it understood exactly what I wanted. And I actually printed this out, and it came out exactly like this. And interestingly enough, really, really fascinating actually was it took into account when I was printing the part out whether I wanted the part to be scaled up or scaled down, meaning I had the units in centimeters. It wanted to ask me if I wanted it to be printed in full as centimeters, or if I wanted to have it be scaled down in millimeters and print a smaller piece. And just at the drop of a hat, it was able to do just that for me. Now, when you talk about more complex parts, you can easily break down a more complex part into more separate individual parts. and then you as the expert can put them all together, right? It's not to say that you as the expert are completely removed from the equation, but what it is saying is that the barrier to entry is significantly lower. I do not have a CAD design background, yet I was able to essentially work through that at the drop of a hat. And that's the reality of today's businesses. That's the reality of today's market. That more and more people have access to all sorts of resources, all sorts of capital, and it scares big businesses because it means competition. And if you're a big business, the name of the game, especially nowadays in what people call capitalism, isn't really actually capitalism. It's really more like welfare queens fighting over favoritism, be it in the form of sweetheart tax deals, sweetheart land deals, and sweetheart contract deals where you are sourced as the exclusive vendor for certain parts. And I'm going to use that as the springboard for our next step, which is what actually happened, right? What actually happened on the Palisades fire. Understanding how the technology sector actually works, understanding that really it has nothing to do with technology, but it actually is all about suppressing competition. It's all about what financial incentives do you have for not giving access to a diverse supply chain, and how do you sell people on the illusion that it's for this mission when in fact it's not. And that's where we come into a entity known as the Rev Group. Let's see. I don't know why Google's making me do that, but here we go. I just had it pulled up. Crosswalks. Traffic lights. It's probably because I have my VPN on. And it doesn't like my VPN. Alright, well, while I figure that out, I'm just gonna leave that aside. There's an entity known as the Rev Group. And the Rev Group basically is this consortium of manufacturers that specifically is one of the biggest, well, actually the biggest market share holder for the manufacturer of trucks in America, specifically fire trucks. That's everything from suspension components, steering components, to even the control systems that are actually gauging the pressure of the pump that's pushing out water, and being able to, some trucks have remote control options with it, as well as the hydraulic parts within it. That is all encompassed by the Rev Group, and they actually service the Los Angeles Fire Department. Okay, back in about a year ago, for the 2024 to 2025 fiscal year budget, Bass approved a about $20 million reduction in the LAFD budget. And ultimately, what she specifically did with that budget cut is she took away access. She cut about 75 civilian jobs where they were predominantly maintenance staffers, right? So we're talking about truck repair, diesel technicians, those types of jobs. But it doesn't end just there. It's one thing to have a mechanic on hand, but it's another thing to actually have that mechanic have access to parts to be able to service the trucks, and not just suspension parts, but also access to electrical parts, like electronic control units that are managing the brain for the control systems, that when you flip a switch and you want your water pump to push water, it's measuring how fast, the volume, as well as to which hose you're directing that water to. And if it needs a boost, say you have two hoses running simultaneously, that electronic brain needs to operate correctly to successfully divert the water as well as maintain whatever flow rate you want at the pressure that you want. The only service provider that is really at the forefront of providing access to those parts is the Rev Group. The Rev Group is a major political contributor to many individuals within LA County and LA City. The Rev Group is very well known for in manufacturing and technology for basically having a widely monopolistic approach to contracts where they're the sole service provider, not only for parts, but also for the technicians that they authorize to service the trucks. And it's very similar to, if you know how Apple stores work uh, with iPhone repairs, where you have third-party stores have to go through this whole bogus accreditation system on being able to be considered what's called an authorized Apple repair dealer and service center to work on iPhones. Now, that doesn't mean that they actually are competent at working on those iPhones. What it actually is a exclusive contract for procurement and supply chain where Apple will distribute parts to you at a significant cut, but it comes at major stipulations. It comes with a lot of shady dealings, and it's very well known that Apple does this, where they don't allow any third party part installations, even though oftentimes you can substitute a third party piece as a one-to-one direct replica. That leads to a major increase in cost for the consumer. Another issue is that Apple also forces these service repair centers to basically undergo a gag order where they can't really criticize the business practices of Apple, and they just kind of have to deal with it. This is basically how the Rev Group operates, but it's specific to fire trucks. And so, let's see. What they do is they operate under this consortium where they sell the illusion, right, that if we are your main vendor provider, your vendor, and your service repair center, as well as a trainer, because they also get business revenue in the form of training the repair staff. So, like, obviously, LAFD can have technicians of their own, but to actually train them. And ultimately, what happens is the reason for the selling of such services is because the parts are not standard. So you'll have hydraulic systems that are not standard to many other truck size components, such as logging trucks, which do have a standard for the sizing of the hydraulic components, their suspension components, and so on. The way that those parts are manufactured, to the process to trade in a broken part, right, and get a new part sent in, to even the electronic systems, specifically in this case the control systems, from the software that drives the computer, as well as to the look and feel on the computer screen, on what's displayed, are all proprietary, meaning you have to have specific. And I'm actually gonna pull up my other one. Pull up this here. Brave. Dun, dun, dun. To the way that you can program the control systems. the most interesting part about those control systems is that you can actually, there we go. You can actually interchange those parts quite easily. The controller, everything from the controllers themselves to the what's called the screens, which in technology speak we often call those a human machine interface, an HMI screen. Everything from the colors to the different touch buttons that are shown on the screen, as well as all the gauges, are very standard parts. And in fact, the actual programming language to develop the controllers to do all this stuff is very standard. It's been very standard in industrial manufacturing, in an industrial manufacturing environment. Think, large chemical plants and so forth, for many, many years. The reason why the proprietary aspect is so heavily drilled into the Rev trucks. So I'll show you one in particular, the E1. And then, no, they have one other one, VM8. So this here, you can see, right, the different gauges and screens. The reason why they drill the proprietary aspect into it is because you have a constant stream of revenue coming in, right? It doesn't matter if it's not as effective. It doesn't matter if it's not as user friendly. It doesn't matter if it's not as intuitive. What matters is that you sell a proprietary product that has repeat customers, rather than allowing the customer, in this case LAFD, to actually own the asset that they purchase, right? Not just the frame of the truck, right? Not just the tires and the wheels, but every aspect of that asset, right? From digital, right? The computer unit, to the software that's driving all the other aspects of the computer unit. That's the big issue. That's the big issue, and why ultimately, in addition to the budget cuts, the Palisades fire was really a major disaster, right? It wasn't for a lack of knowledge. It wasn't for a lack of not understanding the scale. It was primarily because there was major business interests in how is it that the Rev Group can continue being a major market holder, a primary vendor and contractor for LAFD, as well as many other fire departments across the US, while simultaneously being the bottleneck for parts, which are non-standard, as well as suspension parts, not just the electronic parts, but mechanical parts, and engines. How is it that we can continue to hold control and essentially use this disaster to ideally sell more services, right? Not to help those affected, not to look to see what's better for the customer, but to make our bottom line better. And one of the most interesting things actually is you can actually see it right here with those windows. So this is another example of unnecessary proprietary design, right? You have a fire truck that obviously its weight alone is not aerodynamic. I mean, it's a box and it has wheels. But this is the most interesting part here. A lot of people don't understand this, but the windshield, for example, having a curved windshield is actually a very difficult thing to do. It's a blend of proprietary processes that really you can only get from the vendor that gave you the truck. It was often the case, and especially for much older logging trucks, particularly in the 70s, where the front windshield would just be flat. Why? Because you can cut flat glass on your own dime. You don't need, right? And all this other special geometry, you don't need, right? You don't need all that customization. Flat means you can cut it on your own dime. You don't need reliance on another vendor's proprietary parts. And it allows you to have, especially for a critical service like fire responders, and EMTs, you have a more robust and resilient supply chain, which ultimately, again, at the end of the day, we're talking about thwarting and reducing competition and stacking up the bottom line. And that's really the unfortunate, sad truth of what actually happened, not just with this disaster, but disasters as a whole. And one other this facet that a lot of people are maybe not as privy to, which is how is it that the ownership of assets and the technology factor really plays into effect. And really, when you strip it away at the end of the day, it's really just about the bottom line, right? The bottom line of having a repeat customer with proprietary pieces that don't need to be that way. They're not that way for some special gain, but they are there specifically to benefit the sole vendor, in this case being the Rev Group. So that's really the unfortunate truth. So yeah, I wanted to cut it as short as I possibly could, not go off on too many tangents, but that's you know, this is a whole series that I had on my mind as I was researching it more and more, but I just wanted to put it out there, leave it relatively short, and hopefully that entices people to do some more digging. And the best part is the motions on the agendas that not only cut the budgets, but also allocate funding for different vendors to do some of this work. And the hiring process is all public. It's all public information, from city council motions to special ad hoc committee hearings that the mayor holds and such. And you can see for yourself. You can see the business interest for yourself, and be able to start piecing together all these different aspects of the story, and ultimately see, right, it's how, you know, in the eyes of Mayor Karen Bass, she's not the only one. She's a symptom, I would say, of a bigger issue. This bigger issue, the root issue being, you know, destroying competition for private ownership of assets to drive away what, weirdly enough, is their stated goal of resilient supply chains, more diverse access to parts and trained experts, whereby these, you know, this information is publicly available, from the software licensing to the dimensions and specifications for each of the parts, as well as the manufacturing processes used to actually make those parts, so that at the drop of a hat, you know, you can do it on your own rather than having to exclusively rely on just one vendor, right? One business entity. And so with that, I'll end it there. Thanks y'all for tuning in. I appreciate it. And I hope you have a good rest of your day. I'll see you in the next one. Peace out.